In this episode, we're going to talk about um, building on upon the last episode, how storytelling and our beliefs and our perceptions can begin to not only shift the way we see the world, but also the way we see ourselves, and how that can have a biological, psychological, and physiological impact on us as human beings. So the stories that begin to shape our beliefs about the outside world can really profoundly shape how we understand ourselves. And in psychology, there's a field called narrative psychology, and it's recognized that we are stories, and we tell about ourselves. So we are the stories that we tell about ourselves. And this sense of identity, who we are, what our life means, is constructed as a personal narrative, a life story that we continuously update and refine. And these stories do not simply reflect like our personality; they are our personality, or at least they become important parts of it. And these things can begin to construct these labels about how we see ourselves. And labels can be valuable in the sense that they can give us this idea of something that we have and that we can progress towards fixing, or progress towards having a better full understanding of it. And they can also cause detriment as well by um, making them seem that it is rigid, that they are essentially who we are as opposed to a part of who we are. So we have to be careful with this idea of labels and constructs versus um, tendencies that we may have, and what the power is behind those things, and how we can utilize that. And we have this each of us have this internalized autobiography that gives our life coherence and purpose. And this self narrative can greatly affect our mental health. So an example to consider would be two people who both face significant hardships. One person's life narrative might be that I've overcome these challenges and grown stronger, and my life is a story of redemption and resilience. And another might be that I am cursed with bad luck, and every time things start to go well, something goes wrong. And within those two narratives, you can see one has this idea of a growth mindset and this idea of agency, and the other one has this rigid, fixed mindset, and it begins to lose agency as the world happens to us, as opposed to us happening inside the world with our own control. And the more that I look into the research, the more that I explore this idea of agency and whether or not we have it, and what are the boundaries that take that away from us, I think that plays a pivotal role in our ability to have positive mental health experiences. And the narrative based off of similar objective events can lead to very different outcomes, right? One has a hopeful one has a hopeless one, in emotional states. And um, one of the things that I think that gets propagated now is this, and it's been propagated for a while, and things that get propagated, there are truth to them, but you don't want that truth to be a defining factor of whether or not you have agency in the world. And this idea of oppressed versus oppressor, and the idea that the oppressed no longer has the ability to overcome their situations due to the oppressor having all the power in the world. And obviously there's truth to that, in the fact that the oppressors do have a lot of power. But I think that narrative tends to bind us to this lack of agency, that we are stuck in this due to circumstances outside of our control. And that whether or not that's something that is endowed upon them for reasons of power control, or whether or not that is just a narrative that they've built based off of truth, and probably somewhere in the middle, that they have this inability now to have power for themselves. And I think that the research supports this idea, that the content and the structure of one's life narrative correlates with well-being. People whose life stories feature redemption sequences bad experiences that ultimately lead to good outcomes or personal growth tend to have higher life satisfaction and positive mental health, whereas those whose story features contamination sequences, good times that were spoiled or followed by bad outcomes, tend to have worse mental health. And there was a study done on midlife adults who saw that their lives as following a redemptive narrative scored higher on measures of generativity, which is concern for others in society, and had greater psychological well-being, whereas the ones who saw their lives as a series of failures or betrayals can be associated with depression and anxiety. And psychologists also examine coherence and personality narratives. And a healthy narrative has a certain coherence. Events are arranged in an understandable order. Cause and effects make sense. And there's some integration of painful experiences. Trauma can shatter that coherence. People with PTSD often describe their traumatic memory as fragmentary, chaotic, or like it doesn't feel real to them. It lacks a structure, a narrative structure. And part of healing is to reintegrate the trauma into a coherent story of the self. And we'll talk about some of the ways that they do that through storytelling, through psychodynamic pharmacological interventions, and part of this research done by James Penbaker and others are on expressive writing found that when people write about traumatic or emotional experiences, those who eventually construct a more organized narrative of the event tend to experience greater improvements in mental health. Um, One of the studies, I'm not going to be able to recall it verbatim, but there was a study about journaling. I think it was like a 45-minute intensive journal, and the subjects came in that had traumatic experiences, and they wrote for 45 minutes on that traumatic experience, and then they came in the next day, I believe, and they did the same exact journaling, and they found that through this, I believe it was a 5-day process of 45-minute journaling, that they were able to reintegrate the trauma into a coherent story of the self. And through this intensive process of these 5 days of long journaling, they were able to have reduced symptoms of PTSD. And we know that that is the construct of what helps people get through traumatic experiences. MDMA serves a very similar purpose from a psychedelic pharmaceutical standpoint of healing and growth, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. So what they found is that the hallmark of recovery can be when a survivor can say, this terrible thing happened to me, but here is how I've made sense of it and how it fits into my life story moving forward. And the mere act of forming a narrative is therapeutic. Studies show that translating chaotic experience into a structured story is linked to reduced stress and better mental and even physical health. And when people first write about their trauma, their accounts might be disjointed, but over days of writing, they naturally start using more cause and effect words and organizing the timeline, indicating a forming narrative. And those are the individuals who show the biggest health improvements. On the other hand, there's this idea of getting stuck in a certain narrative, and that can maintain those mental illnesses. So in depression, individuals often have a narrative of loss, pessimism, or self-blame. Some of the words that they would use to describe would be, I've always been a failure and nothing will ever work out. And this story can become a mental script that plays repeatedly, filtering all new experiences through a negative lens. And then cognitive behavioral therapy, in one sense, tries to interrupt and rewrite these internal monologues to replace a maladaptive story, and replacing that idea of, I'm worthless because of X, Y, and Z with a more balanced idea of X happened, but that doesn't mean I'm worthless. I've succeeded before and I will find a new path. And this is something that I talk to my students about a lot, is this idea as exams come up, look at past experiences to define how you're going to do in future experiences, right? So if you've taken exams previously this semester and you've gotten A's on them, that narrative tells you that there should be no reason to think that if you do the same exact steps, you're not going to get an A again. And just being able to shift that balance of perspective begins to allow them to dampen the anxiety around it, and they're able to retain information better due to stress and anxiety not being a big driving factor in their life, because we do know that stress can hinder our ability to form memories and consolidate things and have these heightened cognitive experiences. And this idea of narrative therapy takes the patient as a storyteller who can reauthor their own life. And it's a form of psychotherapy that was developed in the 1980s by Michael White and David Epstein. And it's built around the idea of separating a person from their problems and helping them craft empowering new narratives. Within this therapy, the therapist might ask the client to tell their story, how they see their life, their problems, their relationships, and then work with them to deconstruct unhelpful plots and highlight unique outcomes, times when reality didn't fit the problem of the story. Some key techniques within this is to include externalization. So an example of that would be instead of saying I am an anxious person, saying I am someone who struggles with anxiety. Again, you're taking that label of I am an anxious person that has agency over you now, and then you're giving yourself back agency as describing yourself as a person who has a tendency towards anxiety sometimes, and this allows you to have agency over the situation. So again, these narratives are all about providing agency to the person, and this can help people gain distance and realize they aren't inherently broken or defined by the problem, and they can change their relationship to it. Another technique within this narrative therapy is finding alternative storylines. So the therapist and the client search for neglected pieces of the client's experience that don't fit the dominant negative narrative and build those into a new story. So an example of that would be a person who sees their life as a string of failures might, with gentle question, like recall instances of perseverance, kindness, or skill that they had dismissed. Highlighting these and threading them together offers a counter narrative. And that can be something that can be extremely helpful, showcasing that this person is not X, but in fact, they are resilient, they are caring, and they've just gone through some tough circumstances. But in the past, that character has been resilient and can push through. And the ultimate goal is for the client to see themselves as the author of their own story, who can choose interpretations that align with their values and hopes, rather than feeling trapped in a story that had internalized in them. And there's more growing evidence that narrative approaches can be effective for various mental health issues. Meta-analysis have found that narrative therapy can significantly reduce depressive symptoms in some populations. It has also been used with success in treating anxiety, addiction, and trauma. Narrative exposure therapy is a specific method used for treating PTSD, particularly in refugees or survivors of complex trauma. It involves guiding the person to construct a detailed chronological narrative of their entire life, weaving in the traumatic events with support to process them. The aim is to integrate trauma memories into a broader life story, contextualizing the horrors within a story of survival and often resilience. And the APA, the American Psychological Association, notes that the narrative exposure therapy helps establish a coherent narrative that contextualizes traumatic experiences, which can reduce symptoms of PTSD by ordering and making meaning of what happened. And the research has shown that individuals who manage to turn these fragmented, painful memories into a structured story experience fewer post-traumatic symptoms. And this storytelling in a safe therapeutic setting allows survivors to reclaim agency. And I think the key here is that safe setting, right? We always hear about set in is a very important topic when it comes to therapy. We have to create this safety that people can explore. Psychedelic drugs allow these people to explore that safety, right? Because it creates that safety by disrupting brain patterns that allows them to visit these stories. And by having a therapist there guiding them, you can also get the same benefit. And um, it gives them their story back, right? And I think that's one of the powerful things about writing, journaling, some type of expression of your internal self. And that way you can understand the dynamics of storytelling and how powerful that can be. And then there's this, trying to think about the social aspect and sharing your story with supportive friends and groups, and maybe through poetry or art. And I think part of that is because of you get some validation through that, right? You have others hear and acknowledge your story, and that can restore a sense of connection. And you're most likely going to hear from other people as you share the story that, I've gone through something similar, or I've had somebody gone through something similar. And it makes you feel less like you're alone and more like this is something that people have gone through and that people have worked through. And it can bring this sense of relief and hope. And coherence and closure, right? And it's part of several groups that have been successful, such as Alcoholics Anonymous, where members tell their life story through the lens of addiction and recovery, and they can reframe these past sufferings as part of a journey that led them to growth, to helping others, which imbues those events with new meaning and can reduce shame. And then on the flip side, there's certain mental illnesses that can be seen in terms of narrative dysfunction. So, for example, people with schizophrenia sometimes have disorganized speech and thought. One could interrupt that, or one could interpret that as a inability to keep a coherent narrative thread, possibly due to some biological disruptions going on. But they may also create elaborate delusional stories, false beliefs, but they often have an internal narrative logic. Um, treating these delusions can involve gently challenging the story and finding these alternative explanations that the person can accept, effectively trying to replace a maladaptive story with a more reality-based one. And in non-clinical situations, when someone does get stuck, you can help them through that by helping people revise their narratives and maybe seeing that event from a different person's perspective, or a point of view that is seen as a learning experience, and this can unlock forgiveness and emotional reliefs. um, and then another aspect is how shared narratives can affect collective mental health. So, in communities that have experienced trauma, like war or natural disaster, collective storytelling in the form of oral histories or communal rituals can facilitate group healing. Dr. Ethan Cross talked about this in his new book called Shift, where his grandma was a survivor of the Holocaust, and she never talked about it except for one time a year when she got together with other survivors, and they were able to talk and express everything. And it was very cathartic and it was very relieving because of that shared experience. And we see that through my research of interviewing veterans, that a lot of veterans seem to have a hard time connecting with therapists because that therapist does not have that shared experience of war, of military trauma, and that they only feel secure talking to either other veterans or other therapists that have gone through similar experiences. And this idea of being able to share your story with people that can understand it from the same perspective allows you to creates that safety mechanism that we were talking about, that you're not going to be judged. They're going to understand, And I think that's one of the most important things that we can think of in terms of when we do listen to people, to not judge their story and to not interject your feelings, but more so to listen and to understand and to have empathy. Um, I think one of the new tools that they're coming out with to help with these experiences to rewrite the story that's been very powerful and has shown very positive effects is psychedelic therapy, in particular MDMA. And the reason why MDMA is so successful is because it allows people to process and reshape the emotional narrative of a traumatic event. It reduces the fear and hypervigilance and allows the story to be told. So trauma can lock people into like survival mode, and that memory is too threatening to revisit. And what MDMA does is it reduces the activity in the amygdala, which is where the brain has a tendency to have that fear response. And then it increases prefrontal cortex regulation. So it reduces the fear response, and then it increases your ability to make decisions and to revisit painful memories without becoming overwhelmed due to that reduction of the amygdala response. And what this does through therapy and talking through your therapist while on this drug, it opens a rare window where the trauma can be narrated and reprocessed. Um, one of the things that I've heard through therapy is that they were able to talk about sadness without being sad, and that allowed them to dive deep and go into it as deep as possible without having those emotions trigger this fear response that's going to lock them back up. And it also increases the feelings of trust and connection and safety. And it does that by boosting oxytocin, prolactin, serotonin, and it creates these feelings of warmth and bonding and openness. And it makes people feel connected to their therapist and themselves. And that connection allows them to explore in a relational and like secure context rather than from a place of isolation or self-blame. Self-blame is one of the biggest things that is characterized in a traumatic experience. So this will allow them to release that blame, release that shame, and it can also begin to shift that emotional tone of the memory. So under MDMA, they can experience a lot of self-compassion, and they can reinterpret the event from a new lens. Instead of identifying as a victim, a helpless victim, they might recognize their strength, resilience, or innocence in this situation. And this reframing changes the core story from I'm broken to I survived, or even I protected myself the best that I could. And it also promotes memory reconsolidation. The neuroscience suggests that when a memory is reactivated in a safe, altered emotional state, it can be re-encoded with a new emotional valence. And MDMA enables the trauma to be processed in a context of safety and support, which fundamentally like alters its impact on the psyche going forward. And storytelling can also help with this idea beyond trauma, um, and beyond the mental health aspects. There's this idea of again providing agency to people and providing them with this thought process that allows them to be less rigid and less fixated and more expansive and more growth oriented. And this can play a role in the education system, and people can learn through these stories. And we've seen that, right? We've seen that through storytelling it can take somewhat dry information and create engaging, meaningful content. And it can also show them to expand their thought and their creativity, which research shows that creativity is something that is declining as we get more technologically advanced. That we're seeing less and less breakthroughs in science, less and less patents. And I think a large part of that is because the shift in the education system went from open-minded thinking to this idea of standardized testing as being the rigid and structure of success in academia and education. And then research in cognitive science finds that narrative context can increase the student's motivation, comprehension, and memory for the material. And that's something that I talk to my students about all the time is as you're going through these courses, as you're taking a stats class, as you're taking an anatomy class, as you're taking these classes, try to link them to stories that interest you, try to link them to athletes that you want to work with, or link them to research that you want to read to have a better fundamental understanding of it. And these narrative approaches can improve understanding who for people who might find it to be like dull or abstract, and they provide a familiar structure and they make material more concrete, and they can ease these students into complex topics and boost in comprehension. And by increasing their motivation and interest to engage with the material, um, you're going to see a higher prevalence of spending more time and effort and lead into deeper learning. And these stories can also enhance meaning making rather than memorizing facts. Students in a narrative context can often understand why those facts matter and how they discovered and how they apply in real life. History can be one of those topics that can be very, very boring, and the material can be very rote in nature, and it's a lot of memorization. Anatomy can be the same way, but by telling that story, by teaching these topics through stories, um, it can create excitement, it can create passion, and it can create this idea that we want to learn as opposed to we have to learn. And it can also engage different types of learners. Harvard Business School um, wrote a piece where storytelling has visual, auditory, and kinesthetic components all in one. And visual learners can get mental images from description, and auditory learners can focus on the words and voice, and kinesthetic learners tune into the emotions and can almost feel the story. Therefore, you can encompass this versatile pedagogical tool, and the stories are emotionally engaging and they can reduce anxiety around learning. And um, and by having these stories in their mind, it's going to improve their recall when it does come to test taking, because we do know that stories are more sticky in nature, and it can improve memory retention. And teachers often observe this idea that um, stories can help create, um, again, this memory plasticity, the stickiness, to where students can have a improved learned experience by learning these complex ideas and making them into these fun and interesting stories so that they remember them. And there's a lot of expansion through teaching, but also through digital technology, and this can allow students to become storytellers themselves. They always say the best way to learn something and have a full understanding is to explain it to someone else, is to tell that story to someone else. And I think that these ideas, that these stories and these pragmatic approaches to creating better understanding, creating more creativity in a student, can improve this desire to be a lifelong learner. Whereas now there's more people now than ever not wanting to go to college, because they're inundated with this idea that academia is something that is going to be, standardized testing. It's going to be learning X to do Y, and it's not nearly as exciting or as fun, because they are inundated with these ideas through social media that college is no longer something that's important, that they can make a life on their own without it. And more people are seeking to be famous now than they are to be intelligent and creative. And that's where this caveat comes in, that this cognitive load can be a concern. Like if a story is too entertaining but tangential, it might become a seductive detail that distracts from the learning goal. So educators must align their narrative closely with the instructional content. So when done right, the storytelling is a potent way to make learning stick. Um, so it's something that needs to be practiced, something that needs to be taught, and that's fundamentally not necessarily where academia has headed, nor is it taught to academics to be able to express that to the students, so that there is this um, ability to think outside the box. And there was this really good book that I read as an undergrad. It was called The Pedagogy of Oppression. And the whole idea was that the education system, due to its nature of standardized testing, of very black and white fundamental thinking, that it is a way to create this power dynamic of people that won't ask questions, that won't challenge the narrative, won't challenge the norm. And it was a very compelling book with this idea that if we can create kids who get in trouble for challenging the norm, get in trouble for pushing back, get in trouble for thinking on their own, where they have to think in these binary ideas of black and white, that we're building these adults that are going to do the same thing, and how that can be something that can be a governmental and political, um, you know, success for them, to where they can control people more easily through their inability to think outside the box, think creatively on their own. Um, and we've seen this idea where people now are more fundamentally transferred to um, reading the headlines, believing what they hear, and not questioning reality, not questioning things that don't come and fit their bias. They would rather have more things fit their bias, so they search for those things and they only look for the headlines. And then once they see the headline, they're just proof of purchase, right? They're just continuing to buy into that. So this idea of ethical storytelling, and how we can improve um, information and improve the way we think and see the world, is all through this narrative and storytelling that happens at such a young age. And we can see this through the media, through journalism. A well-framed narrative in journalism can bring attention to important issues by humanizing them. So news pieces about healthcare policy might begin with like a personal story of a patient who suffered under the current system, and immediately given a face to a complex issue and swaying public sentiment. And media researchers have documented how such exemplar stories influence what viewers believe is typical or important, and often more so than the actual statistics. So as you start to watch the news, think about what the stats say. Do they talk about the stats, or are they just trying to tell a story? So it can be very positive. It can get people engaged in the story, and it can bring attention to real problems. But it can also skew the perception by focusing on sensational personal angles and unrepresentative of the broader truth. And an example we can think of is this public health campaign, where they're found to be more effective in changing behaviors than purely informational ones. So Melanie Green notes that in Hollywood, films have influenced teens in habits like smoking, because of identification with on-screen characters who smoke. And health promoters now deliberately craft these stories, where characters model healthy behavior, using contraception, getting vaccinated, hoping viewers adopt those beliefs vicariously. And then on a flip side, there's this propaganda and misleading framing, through this idea of fake news and misinformation or malinformation, and what gets pushed and what gets pulled away. And these are usually the things that we see the most, because they're emotionally charged stories and they tend to go viral. And again, these are the outliers, but yet they're so salient in our minds and in our forefront, that we think that this is what's going on throughout the entire world. And understanding that persuasion can help inoculate the public, um, can help with recognizing the hallmarks of conspiratorial narratives, or might alert someone that a piece of content is not objective news, but a crafted fiction aiming to hook them. And social media tells us the same story, where everyone is a potential storyteller, and can begin to change the public consciousness about certain topics. And there's examples of storytelling as a force for social change. So you have individual experience and then amplified and woven into a collection narrative, and then these altered the beliefs of who's reading them, and it enables the rapid spread of false narratives as well, right? Rumors, before fact checks could become available, and we've seen this all the time. We've seen this with the current president showcased in a picture that was photoshopped, thinking that it was the actual real thing, and when confronted with that opportunity to tell the truth, um, just dug in deeper, right? And I think what people are really after nowadays is the truth, and they have this um, perception that we're being deceived all the time through factual stories that have come out that shown deception. So I think one of the biggest narratives that we can think of is, how can we be more truthful? How can we get the truth out there instead of trying to push this divisive narrative of trying to create bigger stories, or trying to push your agenda, right? Think of the community as a whole. Um, so this idea of storytelling, it goes through all aspects of life, from mental health to how we see the world to how we interact with people, and these beliefs and these perceptions that we have can begin to change our brain. It can begin to change our body, and maybe we can use that as a from a positive aspect as well. And some of the research on this idea to shift perception and belief to create these positive outcomes are just as paramount as these negative ones. So we really want to focus on some of the positive stuff that we can get out of it. And there's really good research from Dr. Aaliyah Crumb's lab that I just want to quickly highlight, where we can think about the changing of perception and belief to be a positive thing. And she's done 3 studies that eloquently talk about this, and give you this idea that um, there's a physiological component as well. So one of the studies she did was Mindset Matters, Exercise and the Placebo Effect. And the study design, she did this with colleague Langer, and they did it in 2007. And they had 84 female housekeepers across 7 hotels. One of the groups was a control group. They weren't given any information. And the other group was told their daily cleaning work met the Surgeon General's criteria for exercise. So before the study started, they asked these 84 housekeepers, do you exercise regularly? And they said no. So what they did was they told one that, yes, your work actually is exercise and you do meet the Surgeon General's criteria. And the other group, they didn't give any information about that. And they continued their work as usual. No exercise was added, no nutrition talk, none of that. And what Dr. Crum hypothesized was that merely believing that one is engaging in healthy exercise, even if the behavior doesn't change, can lead to measurable physiological improvements. So after 4 weeks, they ran some of the numbers. They did pre and post, and the informed group showed significant decreases in weight, in body fat, in waist to hip ratio, and in systolic blood pressure, where the control group had no significant changes. And what they found was that the activity levels never changed. They didn't differ between groups. Steps, calories burned, all that stuff, right? And the idea, the interpretation of these results is that the belief that their work was exercise changed how their body processed that activity, right? So we do know that how we interact with the world, stress, use stress versus de-stress, can really create a cascade of either healthy outcomes or negative outcomes. And this idea that this placebo effect can begin to have a physiological impact on our behavior. And these mindsets shifting can enhance the effectiveness of health behaviors, even without changing the behavior itself. So another study she did with colleagues in 2013, it was called Rethinking Stress, the role of mindsets in determining the stress response. They took 388 employees from a large financial institution. One group received a stress is enhancing video, another received a stress is debilitating video, and a control received no information. So the most important idea to understand is that the videos told the truth of each one. They told the positives of stress and they told the negatives of stress, which are both true. So there wasn't any lying, there wasn't any misinformation about what these things can do. And the video was a 3-minute video over the course of a week, and they emphasized the benefits of stress, so it can enhance performance, learning, growth, or the harmful effects, burnout, illness, etc. And the participants who saw the stresses enhancing videos reported lower perceived stress, showed improved work performance and job satisfaction, and had a more adaptive cortisol profiles, suggesting a healthier physiological response to stress. And what this kind of hints at is that there's this idea that mindset about stress significantly influences both our subjective experience and our biological stress responses. So stress is not inherently bad, but how you interpret it shapes its effects. Like we talked about at the beginning of this podcast, is can we see the silver lining in things? Is there a positive that we can get out of this negative experiences? And that can begin to change our physiology. And then the last one that we're going to go over from Dr. Crumb's lab in 2011 is called Mind Over Milkshakes, Mindsets, Not Just Nutrients, Determine Ghrelin Response. So they had 46 healthy adults. They were all given the same exact milkshake, which was 380 calories. One group was told that the shake was indulgent. It was 620 calories, rich and decadent. And then the other group was told that it was sensible. It was a low calorie, 140 calorie, fat-free, guilt-free milkshake. Mind you, they were both the 380 calorie milkshake. And they measured ghrelin levels, which is the hunger hormone that drops after eating when satiety is perceived. And they did blood samples before and after consuming the shake. And what they found was the group that was told that this milkshake was more indulgent had a steeper decline in ghrelin, indicating they felt more satisfied. And the sensible group showed less hormonal response, as if they hadn't had a substantial meal. So the mindset about what you're consuming, not just the food itself, affects physiological digestion signals, which is why they tell you to enjoy your food, eat it slowly, try to think about each bite as something that was the best bite that you ever had. And that can leave you with a sensation of being more satisfied. And that can help with the ghrelin response versus the leptin response. And what this kind of hints at is that the nutrition, there's a psychological component, not just a metabolical one, and this showcase that. And I think that these ideas of how powerful this belief system is begins to shape our physiology and our biology is absolutely amazing to think about. And then how can this help with exercising and improving people's sedentary behaviors? And one of the things that we've seen over the last decade or so is how can we improve people's motivation and enjoyment through interactive storytelling. And one of the things that they came out with was this app called Zombies Run. And then you also have the Pokemon Go that was really popular, where people were constantly active searching for these things. But the Zombie Run, it's a routine. It turns a jog into an interactive story where you are a character in a zombie apocalypse. And as you run, the app's audio plays a narrative. You hear the audio operator guiding you. And, so it gives you this whole felt experience. And what they found was that people that use it, it keeps them more active and not focused on how hard the run is, but it immerses them in the story itself. And we know that this shift in focus, from the discomfort of exercise to the excitement of the story, can really begin to shape people's narrative around exercise is a fun thing and that I'm looking forward to doing it, as opposed to exercise is this daunting task that I have to do. And we know through self-determination theory research that this idea of have to do exercise versus get to do exercise and looking forward to do exercise plays a pivotal role in people's ability to actually continue to exercise and continue to pursue healthy behaviors. And they found that through these apps, that the data with story and character progression keeps users engaged far longer than standard fitness trackers, up to 3 times longer, and that the users report that running for a mission feels more meaningful, turning what was once this like boring workout into an adventure. And this narrative provides this extrinsic motivation in the beginning that can transform into this intrinsic motivation. And we know that intrinsic motivation is the motivation that comes from the inside, that focuses on, not so much the end goal of a trophy, of a desired weight loss, but it focuses more on enjoyment in the process and in the run itself. And these stories can allow, and these changes in perception can begin to allow this idea that we can create an emotional connection to fitness, that could be far stronger than the negative one that you hear often of, um, exercising is hard, exercising is not fun, I don't want to exercise, I'd rather play sports, right? So this idea of how can we get people out there to pursue exercise and pursue a healthy life needs to be shaped in a perception narrative that creates this idea that it's enjoyable, it's fun, it's something that we look forward to. And this idea can be done with, group classes. It can be done with Spartan races. It can be like, there's so many things that can create this personal journey and personal growth for people to see exercise as a fun outlook, right? And that's something that we're focusing on a lot in my lab to do research on, is how can we create this experience to be more enjoyable, to be less perceived discomfort, less rate of perceived exertion, and what behavioral changes can we do to shape that. And this idea of embodied storytelling can help within therapy and within the arts, and it can leverage this connection between bodily movement and narrative cognition. So by moving through a story physically, people can experience catharsis or breakthroughs that talking alone might not achieve, right? So it's that mind body connection that we know plays a pivotal role in how we release certain neurotraffic factors that help with plasticity, that help with changing the way we wire our brain, and that can help change the way we see the world. And there's another concept called embodied cognition, and it is a understanding that a story entails mentally simulating the events with one's sensory motor system. And there's this deep link between how our bodies and brains evolved and why moving through or imagining physical activity actions in a story can make it more salient. So narrative fitness as a broader idea could also speak of cognitive or emotional fitness through narratives, essentially training like one's story muscle, right? For scientists and professionals, there are workshops on narrative training to become better communicators, treating narrative skill like a muscle that improves with exercise. And not everyone is motivated by competition or pure health statistics, right? Many are motivated by fun and meaning, and it's our job as practitioners to create this fun, create this meaning, and story can provide that. It can turn a workout into a quest, where the sweat and effort have a narrative payoff, right? So the gamification of fitness can be something that can be very successful for people to continue their exercise regime. And how can we incorporate that into day-to-day life? How can we incorporate that into the research? Um, it's an impactful thing that can help produce more physically active people by creating these embodied narratives that engage the whole person, and that aligns our brains for the love of story, and it aligns, which can reduce these psychological barriers to exercise and enhance that consistency. So again, in general, right, this idea of how impactful storytelling can be on belief formation, and how it can persuade people more profoundly than um, this local identity that they have, and it can serve as vehicles um, for good, and it can serve as vehicles for bad, and how we have this understanding to shape that can improve not only our mental health, can improve our desire and motivation to learn, and can improve our desire and motivation to be active. And we have to take a very interdisciplinary approach to deepen our insight into storytelling, so that we can have in practical arenas, a teacher teaching a child geometry, or motivating a patient to do physical therapy. By injecting these narratives, it can help yield really high levels of engagement. And storytelling techniques are being consciously deployed, which is going to be a positive thing, but we need to do research to understand it. Neuroscience research can explore how the brain connectivity differs when processing narrative versus expository information. Evolutionary psychologists examine how primal narratives like hero myths might satisfy psychological needs evolved in our ancestors, and artificial intelligence research are teaching machines to understand and generate stories, because narrative intelligence is central to human-like thinking. And narrative medicine encourages doctors to listen to patients' stories, not just symptoms, to treat the whole person. So in almost every field, there's a growing appreciation that human factors, our beliefs, motivations, and behaviors are best engaged through narrative. And in an era of information overload, what often cuts through the noise is this compelling ability to tell a story. Um, and we benefit from being mindful of that sway, right? We benefit from having this understanding. And ultimately, storytelling is neither good nor bad. I think it's good to have a healthy skepticism of the things that you hear, and it's just part of a fundamental human capacity. It has the ability to illuminate truth or obscure it, and to unite people or divide them, to empower, to exploit. And the difference lies in how we use it. So by studying this more intently through the lens of evolution, neuroscience, psychology, exercise, we gain academic knowledge, but also self awareness. And we come to recognize that much of what we hold as belief or perspective comes from stories we have absorbed or inherited. And this awareness allows us to choose our narratives more consciously, to seek out stories that enrich our understanding and empathy, and to question those that distort reality or constrict our humanity. So the story of humanity is largely the story of the stories we've been told. And, it started from myths in an ancient cave to viral videos on our smartphones, and has come a tremendously long way. And it can be our constant companion, our teacher, and sometimes our adversary if we allow it to. And we shape our stories. And our stories shape us, right? By understanding the interplay of story and belief, we equip ourselves to better navigate the world of ideas, and to author the next chapters of our collective human story with wisdom and care. So I hope this understanding of storytelling and perceptions and beliefs to shape who we are, to shape our physiology, our biology, our brain, can be something that's really impactful for you guys to pay attention to learn from, and to use in your day-to-day life, to help improve the quality of your life, to help improve the behaviors in your life, and help improve the empathy towards people in your life. So I hope that you gathered that through these episodes, and I hope that it makes sense to you, and that the research is something that you found to be compelling, and want to dive more into, because I feel like this idea of storytelling and agency is one of the most profound things that we can think of in terms of improving this mental health crisis that we're in.